So truly, I have some introductions for both of these wonderful partners in justice, but I'm going to forego the incredibly lengthy bios on each of them because you can Google them, and you should.
Thank you.
But I will say that Erwin Chemerinsky just became the 13th Dean of Berkeley Law School in July 2017. And before that, he was the founding dean of the UC Irvine Law School and served there as dean for 10 years. He frequently appears on appellate cases, including at the Supreme Court. You're going to have some work cut out for you. And year after year, he is named by National Jurist magazine as the most influential person in legal education in the United States. That's right, my dean. That's right. And he has a really awesome regular column in the Sacramento Bee. I highly recommend you read it. I also want to introduce Fred Blackwell, who is the CEO of the San Francisco Foundation, which is one of the largest community foundations, but I will say just one of the best community foundations. Really a leader in what does it mean to invest in the community and what does it mean to invest in equity and inclusion in the community. Since joining the foundation, Fred Blackwell has really led that effort, not just in his own organization and his own community, but across philanthropy and across the nation. He's an Oakland native. What? Me too, so we got that in common. And he's recognized nationally, and by the way, if you go to a coffee shop with him in Oakland, he knows every single person who comes in. But for his incredible forward-thinking and progressive, and I would even say radical in the best way, approach to philanthropy. And truly, these are two folks that I could listen to all night. We won't, I know it's too late for that. We all got kids. But I do want to actually just open with this to both you, Erwin and Fred. You have a room full of smart, motivated folks who care and who read the papers and know what we are facing right now. And what are the things that you want to say about how we actually do this manifesting of the beloved community to the folks right here in this room?
Sure. I'll start. First of all, thank you for having me. It's a real privilege to be here. Three things come to mind when you ask that question, and most of it we've heard in different ways already by the folks who've been at the podium and who've been accepting awards tonight. The first is, I think that we all have to practice radical imagination. You know, too much of what I hear nowadays in terms of how people view society and where we need to go is based on some form of nostalgia. And I don't just mean make America great again. You know, I grew up in Oakland, and I often hear people kind of talk about the way Oakland used to be and the demographics that used to make up Oakland, as if they've forgotten the kind of disinvestment that was there, the kind of police brutality that was going on at the time. And for me, what that means is that we don't need to be kind of hearkening back to a time that we may feel good about, but wasn't really where we needed to be. We need to be thinking about where we need to go. And really what that means, you know, I had a board retreat a few months ago, and what I told my board, anybody here a Trekkie? Yeah. I told my board, believe this or not, that we're trying to go where no man has gone before. And that's where we are. I mean, we're trying to imagine a society that none of us had really been able to experience yet. And I think that what we heard tonight are examples of that. what Brendan is talking about in terms of reimagining what revenue streams need to look like for local government in a way that eliminates the burden that we're placing on poor people, is radical imagination. What the Black Organizing Project is doing, talking about eliminating police in schools, is radical imagination. And it's that kind of imagination that we have to embrace and we all have to participate in order to get to that place where we haven't seen yet. The second thing that I think is important, and it was also mentioned tonight, is we have to practice fearless solidarity. This notion that one community's gain has to be another community's setback is something that we have to free ourselves from. And in order to get there, it means that we have to put ourselves in closer proximity to people, to perspectives, to experiences that make us uncomfortable. And to be okay in that discomfort and make ourselves vulnerable so that we can better understand what it means to be in solidarity. And sometimes it means showing up when we still don't understand why the other folks are so pissed. Because it means that what is somebody else's problem today is going to be your problem tomorrow. And so I think that's the second thing. And the last thing that wasn't quite mentioned, but I think is implied in all of this, is that we are in a time when the political system is in complete disarray and dysfunction. And where the private and corporate sector seems to be obsessed with generating obscene wealth for the few. And in that situation, what it means is that we have to believe more in civil society. It means that we have to make sure that universities are preparing scholars and engaging in research that allows us to make sure that we have information and that facts matter, research matters, evidence matters in terms of creating policy and where we need to go. We need philanthropic organizations who spend a lot of time building good reputations to do more risking of those reputations at this moment.
Yes.
We need to embrace labor in their struggles in this moment. And last, and we kind of started off with this, we are on the heels of attacks on mosques, churches, synagogues, and those are simultaneously attacks on ethnic groups and racial groups, but they are also attacks on civil society because churches and congregations and mosques and synagogues are places where civil society rests. And so we have to be able to support them as well. So radical imagination, commitment to fearless solidarity, and belief in our civil society, I think, are the things that we need to be doing right now.
Wow, all right.
Can I just say I agree with every word of that? It's really an honor to be here. I've come to cherish the relationship between Berkeley Law and EBCLC. I want very much as dean to do everything I can to strengthen that relationship. To answer your question, I think we need to do what we've been doing, but we need to do more of it and better than ever before. Think about what we've been doing, what EBCLC has been doing, what we've been doing as individual lawyers. It's representing individual clients in need. The reality is there are going to be more people in need who need representation than ever before. I think of the Immigrants' Rights Project and how desperately these individuals need representation. I think the cutback with regard to the so-called social safety net that just isn't there anymore. I think of what the federal government is doing with regard to cutting back legal services. All of these things are meaning that there are more people than ever before who need legal help, and we've got to then be the ones to provide it. We need to do more and better impact litigation than ever before, and we have to do it with the reality of courts that are going to be more hostile to it. We're going to depend on there being courageous federal district court and court of appeals judges. I remember when Judge Stephen Reinhart was alive, he said, "The Supreme Court can't reverse everything I do." We need district court and court of appeals judges willing to say they're going to do the right thing no matter what the Supreme Court does. Whereas lawyers are going to have to turn to state courts and state constitutions much more, because there are going to be times when the United States Supreme Court isn't going to be there for us. We're going to need to turn to the political process much more than we've done before. We're going to need fights either at the community or the state, or maybe even someday at the national level, that previously we wanted to win in the courts. But if the courts aren't there, we're going to have to turn to organizing and working for legislative change. And this has to include winning elections. The reality is, with the Supreme Court, the nominations and confirmation Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh most show us is that elections and electoral college matter. Republicans perceive that much more than Democrats. Of those who voted for Donald Trump, 54% said the number one reason, anything else, the people who voted for the number one reason, was the Supreme Court. For those who voted for Hillary Clinton, the courts are number 4 on the list. If we want to have the courts available, if we want to help our clients as individuals in impact litigation, we've got to win elections too.
Thank you. We have some work to do. We have some work to do. Both of you, in your own ways and in the institutions that you're in, have demonstrated commitment to principles and values of equity and diversity and inclusion in real ways, and in ways that sometimes could invite legal challenges in the UC system, and can invite criticism, because when we get real about what that looks like, not just diversity like the glass vase full of flowers that's colorful and pretty and dies, but the real work of equity and inclusion that is like a plot of soil that we've been given to create a community garden, and we need to get the toxins out first and then weed and garden and plant and weed and garden and plant for the rest of our lives. So how have you envisioned how that work is integrated with the work of San Francisco Foundation now, and how do you, what is the commitment or what is the need for that when everyone wants to focus on those external attacks?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I would say the first thing I would say is we do not have it figured out. And the reason why we don't have it figured out is because it's not really a destination that you arrive at. It's an ongoing journey. And so I can tell you some of the things that we've done. I mean, we think differently about kind of how we recruit. You know, foundations are known for recruiting based on the number of initials that go after your name and, you know, the deep level of experience in a given topic. And we've kind of come to the conclusion that while that's great, that's not necessarily the only prerequisite for being able to be a grant maker or somebody who works with donors or somebody who does something else at the foundation. So rethinking what the qualifications are for jobs is something that we think is pretty fundamental. The other thing that I will tell you that I've been actually late to, because I actually was very emphatic when I arrived at the foundation that we were actually going to draw a line in the sand around the external impact first, and then come back to the internal work. And there are a variety of reasons for that, and some of them I would need a labor attorney here with me to talk about in more depth. But you know, the idea here is that until we know what we're trying to accomplish external with regard to race and equity and inclusion, it's hard to know what it looks like to walk that talk and to have an organization that is commensurate with that dedication. And we aren't there yet, but we're working on it. And I can say what it involves is engagement of multiple levels of the institution and engagement of the different departments within the institution, because everybody has a stake in it. But I'm looking forward to sharing more when we get there. But it takes that kind of fearless solidarity that I mentioned in order to really engage in it well.
Thank you. And the same, and I just came from a conference at the law school today on the end of affirmative action with the passage of Proposition 209 that the Henderson Center and California Law Review had sponsored today, and it reminded me that I was in law school and viscerally felt what it was like to be in a school that went from 30 black students to one single black student in the next class, and Berkeley Law has been rebuilding from that devastation ever since.
And I think it's about three things. I think it's about commitment to diversity. I think it's about empowering people who make decisions to pursue diversity. And it's about being creative. In order to achieve diversity, there has to be an articulated commitment to diversity. It won't happen otherwise. When I arrived at Berkeley Law last year, I saw that we had among the fewest number of African American students in recent years. I was very afraid that that would turn into a spiral. With African American students seeing fewer there, they'd be less likely to come. And so I said, we have to, obviously consistent with the law, find a way to increase diversity. And I'm proud that this year in our first year class at Berkeley, we have 28 African American students. To put this in context, Tirien, since Prop 209 was adopted in 1996, the largest number before this year was 21. The largest number in Berkeley Law history was 32. It wouldn't have happened had we not articulated our commitment to diversity. A second part of this is empowering those who make decisions. No one at the top is able to make all of the hiring, all of the admissions decisions. And so you need to tell those who are making those decisions that you'll be behind them when they make the hard choices and you care about diversity. I can speak as a dean of a law school. I was very proud that at UC Irvine, and we hired all the faculty, obviously the time I was there, that 40% of our faculty were faculty of color and about half were women. The way we did this, I can tell you, is that every year I got to appoint the appointments committee. And I appointed a committee each year of people who cared about diversity. What I've said every year that I've been a dean at Irvine and Berkeley to the person who's in charge of admissions is, I really care about diversity. We have to do it consistent with Prop 209 in the law. Just make sure I have a plausible defense when I get sued.
And you know some good lawyers.
But the reality is the state of California has prematurely capitulated to Prop 209. Right. And we have to push the envelope. Yes. And if we get sued, and I hope we won't, that's what the University Council's office is for. And what I need to do as a dean is to tell those who are making decisions that I'm empowering them to do that. And finally, we have to be creative. We have to come up with new solutions. So what I did when I arrived at Berkeley was realize that the problem we were having wasn't a decrease in applications from African American students. It wasn't a decrease in admission. It was a decrease in yield. They weren't coming. So we created a very aggressive program using alumni, using students, using faculty to reach out. We did the same thing this year for Native American students. We have the most Native American students in the history of Berkeley Law School. I can obviously only speak of this in the context of law schools, but I'm convinced in any institution, it's about the commitment, the empowerment, and the creativity to achieve it.
Thank you. All right. So I'm going to ask you all, because we need this in this time, what gives you hope? What gives you hope? What is your lighting even a single candle rather than just shrieking into the darkness, which I sometimes want to do? What gives you hope right now?
History. If you look at the course, say, American history, there's been tremendous expansions of freedom and equality. It hasn't always been linear. There's been ups and there's been downs. But when I talk to my students who feel despondent to the future, I say, just think with regard to gay and lesbian rights. In 2003, 15 years ago, not a single state allowed gays and lesbians to marry. 12 years later, in every state in the country, gays and lesbians had the ability to marry. And it happened because people fought for it in the political process, fought for it in the courts at the state level, ultimately fought for it in the Supreme Court. And so, while there's enormous injustices in our society, with regard to race and sex and sexual orientation, There's also a lot more equality than there used to be related to race and sex and sexual orientation. When you think of the rights that people have, there's ways in which they're in danger, but there's still more than they used to be. And so I believe that in the future, the progressive position will be vindicated, as it has been by history. I think Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. got it exactly right when he said, the arc of the moral universe is long and it bends towards justice. What I try to tell my students, it'll happen if they work to make it happen. And so we're coming into, I think, a very bad time with regard to the Supreme Court. It's a bad time with regard to the President and Congress. But it's not going to last forever. It's going to be better. And we have to be prepared to take advantage of it when that happens.
All right. Fred?
Yeah, two things, and one of them really dovetails with what was just said about history. The first is, you know, as a California guy, California gives me hope. And for a real important reason. I came of age and started voting and really engaging in this stuff in the late 80s and early 90s. And I remember that being a time when everything I voted for lost. Whether it was 209 or 3 strikes or you name the backwards thing that we were doing back then. We were leading the nation in bad policy. And we were leading the nation in bad policy because we were driven by the fear of the changing demographics of the state of California. So what gives me hope is what I see the country going through now is what I think I saw the state of California going through in the late 80s and the early 90s. I saw, because I grew up in it, the organizing, the advocacy, the policy work, the solidarity commitment that really turned the tide in California. And I think that that same thing is happening right now, and I think it's going to turn the tide for the nation. Which leads me to the second thing, which is young people are going to lead this. And I am completely hopeful and optimistic and given hope by what I see young people doing every day.
Yes. All right. So the final is what is the role of the East Bay Community Law Center, who we have all come here to support, in manifesting that hope and manifesting that recognition of our role in pulling that arc of the moral universe towards justice, rolling it. What is the role?
Really briefly, continue the radical imagination around what the role of the lawyer and what the role of the law is in creating the society that we want, and preparing young lawyers to step into that in their roles as they leave those institutions.
Yay.
We need EBCLC now more than ever before. It really goes to what I was saying earlier, Tirien. There are more people in our community who are going to need representation, and we need EBCLC to provide it. We need the impact litigation that EBCLC engages in. We need the policy advocacy that EBCLC does it. And in all of this, I want Berkeley Law to continue to be a partner in doing this. We together are going to train the next generation of lawyers. These are the ones who are going to be the agents for change in the future. We're going to, by doing this together, really be able to bring about the kind of reforms we're talking about and really make a difference in people's lives. Often the most important, the intimate aspects of their lives.
Thank you so much, both of you. I want to thank you both. You give me perspective and courage, and that is what gives me hope. You all, I really believe this is true, that this is, and we are, and the force of history is behind us, that we are what is being resisted, and our vision for a humane and kind and compassionate and brilliant future is ultimately going to prevail. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you both. Thank you. You're awesome. You're totally
You're wonderful,
amazing.
Tirien. Thank you for letting me be part of
I
that.
love it.
It's so special.